So, I never grew up going to church. I never grew up in any, kind of organized religion. My father went to Catholic school when he was a kid. And my mother just never grew up in it, right? And for me, the interesting thing is that I started out my adult life, I guess, where I didn't really have any kind of religious ideas, any kind of religious upbringing again. I was just pure materialist. We're all made from space dust, and the closest word that I would use to describe God was, I would say, the universe, right? And I was that way for a while. And as I started exploring spirituality and different spiritual practices and meditation and things like that, I began to get insights, I began to get wisdom, I began to get ideas, right? But none of it ever really had a lot of transformative power in my life. And then as I started to go through my 20s and kind of just go through a lot of pain and a lot of trial and a lot of mistake making and ups and downs, and really start to learn about life and how unfair life is and how unfair the world is, I started to really do some deep thinking and some deep reflecting, and I started to develop a lot of ideas about life and eternal life and God and heaven and hell and all these other things. And then I thought I had a really good outline and a really clear idea about the way that God worked and the way that life worked and the way that the afterlife worked and everything. And I was close. I'd say I was very close. And then recently, just several months ago, what I discovered was something called the Orthodox faith, right? Which is Orthodox Christianity, specifically Greek Orthodox. And a lot of people don't know this. The first Bible that was written, I believe, was actually written in Greek. And I had been exposed to it in my early childhood without even really knowing. There was a lot of Greek kids at this one particular school that I went to, and they all went to this particular church that also had a Greek festival in the fall. And I had been there once or twice, but I didn't know that the church there was actually a Greek Orthodox church. And then, of course, a lot of years later, I start, doing some dive and really wanting to get to know Jesus. And then I found that, and I was like, whoa, this has been there from, the beginning. And when I started to do some reading and do some, reflection on it, and I started to study it and learn about it, I realized really quickly that everything that was in this particular faith lines up with kind of what I had come to find through my own life and my own experiences and my own deep contemplation. And I had ideas about what heaven and hell were, and I found that what they teach and what the ancient Christians used to teach, which is the church, because the Orthodox faith and the Catholic faith were actually the same church all the way up until, I believe, somewhere around 1000 AD. And then the Catholics split off And the Orthodox faith has kept practicing almost the exact same way, with the exception of like some language changes, for 2,000 years. And when you go into one of those services, it's very different, because almost always you're either standing, or a lot of times you are actually kneeling and prostrating yourself, similar to the way that Muslims pray, right? So it was really interesting to me. And then I began to learn about some of the theology and some of the beliefs and what they teach, and it just lined up so well, because a lot of us who grow up going to Baptist churches or going to Catholic churches, like I said, I didn't grow up in that, but I have been to a lot of these churches throughout my life. And what's always almost taught about heaven and hell is heaven is this like pearly gated, cloudy kind of resort with golden streets, and everyone just kind of going around having a good time, right? And that never sat with me. I never could think to myself, yeah, that makes total sense, right? And then hell was always, fire and brimstone, and this dark, hot, fiery place that you go to, and you're trapped there forever. But that also never sat well with me, right? And then the ideas that I have started to come to is that, heaven, real heaven, is just the experience of being willing to know God, and being living in such a way that you give your life over to Jesus and to God, and to eventually come home, right? And the experience of it is what you could imagine is like if you grew up in a loving home with your parents, and then you went away to go fight in World War II, say, and you were gone for 5 years, and your parents were back home waiting for you, and then you come home, and they're just so happy to see you, and they're so just, proud of you for going out there and fighting the war and coming back, and they welcome you as a hero, and they open their arms and they embrace you, and they're just so enamored with you. And that's always what made sense to me when I started to move towards actually using the word God and referring to God and believing in God. And that's how I imagine He loves you. And then I learned through starting to look at the faith that that's what the Orthodox faith teaches. And on the flip side, for me, I always imagined hell as being this, I didn't always imagine it. I started to imagine it once I started to wrestle with some of these ideas. I imagined hell as being this chosen separation from God, right? Where you live your life in a certain way, and then in the afterlife, in death, because you chose to be separated from God, you're left with nothing but the anger and the resentment and the bitterness and the pride and all the, I guess what we'll call the 7 deadly sins. You're left to experience nothing but that, because you refused to let it go, and you refused to give your life over to God and to Jesus. And so after you die, you're left with nothing but your worst experiences, right? And when I started to find out that that's what they were teaching, and that the way to eternal life is simply to know God and to know Christ and to give your life over, and that when you do that, and if you live with grace and you truly in your heart of hearts not only believe it, but you act on it and you live your life in a way that is in alignment with that. Because what you'll notice, and what I notice doing it, now again, I'm only a couple months in, right? So I'm not even baptized, I'm not any of that. I'm just speaking from my own raw experience, is that when you live in the way that you do when you're becoming a member of this Orthodox church, everything just becomes so, I'm not going to say blissful, because obviously life is still hard, but at the end of every day, when you can abstain from doing these negative behaviors and engaging in these negative behaviors, and avoid doing all the things that they describe as sin, where you're choosing to step away from God and God's love and God's plan. That's what sin is, right? It's choosing separation from God through various actions, as opposed to choosing to become closer to God, right? I heard it put once in a book that I read called Anatomy of the Soul, where sin is any action where you're choosing to be mindful and to become closer to God. That's what grace is any action where you're choosing to be mindful and to become closer to God. And sin is any action where you're choosing to be mindless and to separate from God, right? And so every single thing that they tell you in the Bible, as far as the true core fundamental teachings of it, of thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery, and these other different sins, right? Every time you don't do those, just in your heart of hearts, you feel God's presence and God's love, and you feel, I took a wrong turn, that this is what life and living and existence is about. And it's just so powerful, right? And people might be asking, a lot of atheists or kind of new age people will always say, well, if God is eternal love and God is all about love and forgiveness and understanding and these different things that people say, all God is unconditional love and these things. It's like, yes, God is all of these things. However, just like a good human father, right? God will allow his children to make the mistakes and the life choices that they're going to make, and to deal with the consequences of those, right? And I can especially talk about this now because I am a father. I have 2 daughters, right? And I love them more than could ever be put into words. But if they were to do something in their kind of adult life that required them to face consequences for that, then as much as I would ever want them to not have to experience that, as a father, if I try to shield them from consequences of their actions, then I'm doing a disservice, because I'm preventing them from growing into fully developed, evolved human beings, right? And that's the way that, I imagine God feels about all of us. And, as a father, as fathers, our job is to give our children a path to follow so that they don't have to experience so that they don't have to go through these negative experiences if they can avoid it, right? And that's why we as fathers, do things like instill values and morals and discipline into our children. We try to teach them grace. We try to teach them prudence. We try to teach them honesty and integrity and keeping your word, right? And I feel like as fathers, we also would sacrifice anything for our children. And if there were ever a situation where our children were in imminent danger, if you're a real man and you're a real father, you'll put yourself first and you will say, me, don't hurt them, hurt me. Don't kill them, kill me. Right? Do not hurt my children. I will take it. I will take the pain. I will take the suffering. But just please leave them alone. These are my children. And so the way that I had already started to think about it before I found the Orthodox Church was that's what he did when he sent his son, right? He said, I am going to incarnate and I am going to live a human life, and in doing that I'm going to sacrifice myself. I will be the blood of the Lamb, and I will send myself down so that I can take all of that pain and all that hurt and all of that misery and suffering and sin, and I'll take that upon myself. I'll wear it so that they don't have to. And he did that, and in doing that he gave us a clear path to follow and a clear way to have eternal life. Sorry. And even though he did that and he sent himself down and he took all of our sin and he took it all upon himself, and he said, hurt me, don't hurt my children, he still, as a loving father would, gave us 100% free will. And he never will step in and say, no, don't do that. Right? He'll give you the message. He'll say, hey, this might not, that's what your conscience is, right? Is it's God saying, hey, this is not the way. But he still gives us the free will to do it. And so even now, when I fall into weakness and I fall into temptation and my conscience tells me, hey, don't, this is not the way you want to go, and I still do it anyway, right? No matter how much it hurts him, he allows us to do that, because even though we're all individual beings and we're all individual souls, right? We're all still connected. We're like leaves on a tree, right? And when the leaves fall, we can either be absorbed back into the soil that is God, so to speak, or we can be blown away by the wind, right? So, we are leaves on a tree and we fall, and we either get, if pardon my language, but we either get decomposed and absorbed back in to the soil and into the roots of the tree, and we become one with the Creator again, or we get blown away by the wind of sin and the wind of I guess Satan would be the word, and we get taken away from the Creator and away from God. And because we choose this, right? Just like a father, God says, hey man, if you really feel like that's what you want to do, then I'm going to allow you to do that, because I love you so much that I would never want you to feel like I'm holding you back. And this was explained very, very well in a video that I watched. It was just a quick reel that I found on Instagram of someone who I deeply, deeply love and respect, even though I've never met him. But, I've been reading things that he's published and watching his videos and reading his books and doing courses of his for almost 13 years now. And he explained an experience he had starting when he was young, where his grandmother, who was just his guardian angel, would come to him and she'd visit him. Even though she was dead, she'd visit him, and he didn't really know what was going on. And he says, hey, or his grandmother says, he's like, where are you, Grandma? And she says, I'm one with God. I'm one with the Creator of the universe. And, that's what heaven is. And, he asked her, he's like, well, how is it that you're coming to me, and how is it that you're visiting me right now? And she goes, well, even though, I'm one with the Creator, it's like when your phone rings, you pick it up, and I know it's you because I'm one with God, and I know your essence, and I know, forgive me, I'm probably butchering this, but, his grandmother told him, she's like, I know your essence, and I know you because I loved you, and because I love you so much, I can't leave you just to be alone, and I have to check in on you, and I have to watch over you, right? And so I didn't really have like a plan so much as to where I was going with this, but basically those were a lot of the ideas that I had, and then everything idea-wise that I had about faith and about God and about heaven and hell and eternity and the universe and creation and everything just got nothing but confirmed when I found the Orthodox faith. And it's really been amazing, because unlike a lot of churches, right, this faith, I'm not going to say requires, because any loving faith is not going to require anything of you, but they have asks of you. They have expectations of you as a member of the church, as a human being, and I think particularly as men. So, for example, on Wednesdays and Fridays, today's a Friday when I'm filming this, we abstain from eating any animal products. So no meat, no fish, no dairy, no eggs, right? Just Wednesdays and Fridays for most of the year. We don't eat those things, right? And I'm not sure what a lot of other people do, but me, the way I've been doing it is I try even to fast, just, not totally, but, fast most of the day. And then at the end of the day, I'll have one simple meal of, whether it be rice and beans or some, kind of nuts and fruit, or I'm a lot more ascetic with it than I'm sure some people are who aren't monks or priests. And we, are encouraged to use those days to, pray even more than just when we wake up and when we go to bed. And, obviously along with the expectations of, being a good human being and being a good father and a good husband and having a family and, serving God by serving others in the world and being honest and having integrity and having prudence and having all these wonderful values. And it's just so refreshing to find something that is so old, but that is exactly not just what I needed, but what men need in the world today. Men need expectations placed upon them. They need to be challenged. They need their ideas challenged. They need to have routines and rituals, and they need to become closer to God, because when I look at the way the world was going the past 4 years, and 5 years now, and I really never was too vocal about it because I was always so just caught up in the pain that I have and the pain of where I was messing up in life and having struggles, that I never was too focused on what the world has going on. I mean, I was aware, but I was never really eaten up about it, because I'm like, hey man, life is what it is and people are going to do what they're going to do. But now I'm just at the point where I'm sort of taking that fatherly worldview and that fatherly love that I have and that I just had for my kids, and I'm putting it on to the whole world, where I want to love the world and be of service to the world the way that God and the way Christ was. I'm not saying that I am God or that I am Christ. I'm saying that that's an example to me of how to treat the world. And so even when I come across people who are still living in the way that I used to live, and who are still engaging in a lot of the kinds of behaviors and ways of living that I no longer can, reconcile, I just treat them with nothing but respect and love and dignity as best I can, because I'm by no means the worst human being to ever, live on the face of the earth. But I've done a lot of really messed up and a lot of really morally questionable things in my life. And, through finding the faith and through finding God and through finding Jesus, pardon me if my language is not as articulate as some people, but through finding God, I'm learning that there's nothing you ever do in life that cannot be redeemed. There's no person who still draws breath that is beyond God's love and God's redemption. And I mean, anybody, even murderers and people who commit crimes against children and these things, don't get me wrong, if you hurt a child, I am fully in support of the death penalty, but that's only because I feel that should be the consequence for hurting innocence, right? And, that aligns with what Jesus taught is, do not hurt the innocent, right? But even them, they can still be redeemed through God's love if they choose to accept it. And so when I hear those things and I think about my own life and the things that I've done to hurt people, I'm no longer as torn up about it, because I know that even though I feel I don't deserve it, God feels that I deserve his love and his forgiveness, and that I deserve to be redeemed. And if I live with grace and I, do daily actions to serve him and to serve others, that I can return home. And having that worldview and having that understanding, I'm no longer scared of death. I'm no longer scared of what happens to me, right? Because I know, no matter what, that if I choose to love him and I choose to accept him, he's already accepted me and his door is open. And some days, I'm not gonna lie, I feel like the world would be better if I wasn't in it. And I look at a semi coming the other direction on the road, and I think, man, it wouldn't it just be easier if he just swerved over and took me out? But I truly believe and I truly feel that I was created the way I was created, and that I am the way that I am because I have something to give through my pain and through my suffering that I've experienced in life. That I have something truly unique to give to the world, and that by just being honest about it and knowing that I'm loved by him and that I'm loved by people that care about me and by my own Father, that I can have these demons in my past and the darkness that's there, and I cannot have to worry about the world diminishing me because of it, if any of that ever comes to the light, because I'm loved. God bless. Have a great day.